They laughed when you stayed, sat around tables, mocking, whispering, acting like your loyalty was a joke only they were in on. You smiled through it, didn't flinch, didn't fight, because you thought love meant staying silent when it hurt, thought kindness would eventually be seen, valued. But they smirked when you forgave, rolled their eyes every time you swallowed pain like it was a virtue, every time you chose peace over pride, mercy over malice. They called it weakness, cowardice, said you were too sensitive, too emotional, said you'd never survive in a world like this if you didn't toughen up. You were never soft. You were just tired of being sharp. You gave chances they didn't earn, bit your tongue until it bled, held doors open for people who slammed them in your face. And still, you stayed. They thought that meant you'd never leave, that you'd always be there, smiling quietly, letting them take and take and take, until there was nothing left of you but bones, wrapped in patience. Visual, dimly lit room. One person sits in a chair, alone, silent, staring at the floor. Thunder cracks. But let me ask you something. Is kindness weakness, or is it a storm no one sees coming until it tears through everything they thought was permanent? Because here's the truth they don't teach you. Real strength isn't loud. It doesn't scream. It doesn't throw things. It endures. It watches. It learns. Then it leaves. They thought you were harmless because you didn't bite back. But the kind ones, the truly kind ones, they're the most dangerous because they gave you peace when they could have given you silence. They gave you forgiveness when they had every right to turn cold. They gave you understanding when you only gave them chaos. And now the silence they laughed at is haunting them. That's what people forget. Kind doesn't mean weak. It never did. But they forgot that until you left, until the peace they once took for granted turned into a silence they couldn't fill, until the smile they ignored stopped showing up, until your calm turned into absence, until they realized the one who never fought back was never afraid to walk away. You were the quiet in the storm, the light no one noticed until it went out. But now they remember. Now they feel it, and every moment of peace they have from here on, they'll remember it used to come from you. The voice sharpens. They forgot that kind doesn't mean weak, but your silence, your absence, that you weren't the loudest in the room. You didn't fight to be seen. You weren't there to impress, compete, or chase applause. You just showed up, fully, quietly, completely. You were the one who asked how they were doing and actually meant it. The one who remembered the little things they mentioned in passing and brought it back a week later like a gift, wrapped in thoughtfulness. You didn't ask for much, just time, honesty, maybe a little effort. But even that, somehow that was too much for them. You gave, consistently, freely, not because you were weak, but because you cared. Because that's what kind people do. They give even when their hands are empty. They pour even when their cup is cracked. They hold others up even when they're falling apart inside. You were their comfort zone, the safety net beneath their recklessness, the emotional charger they ran to, after draining themselves in fake rooms, with fake friends, chasing fake validation. You were the soft landing, the quiet yes in a world full of harsh no's, and they loved that. They just never respected it. They mistook your consistency for convenience, your kindness for compliance, your loyalty for availability. You showed up when no one else did, again and again, and somewhere along the way they stopped being grateful. They started expecting it, like your love was a subscription they never had to pay for. They took the way you forgave as a sign you'd never leave. They took your softness and stretched it into something spineless. They believed the story, that the one who bends will never break. But God, how wrong they were. You weren't spineless. You were spineful. You carried everyone else's burdens when yours were already too heavy. You broke in silence just so others could heal in noise. And the worst part, nobody saw it, because you never showed it. You cried quietly. You fought invisible battles. You swallowed words you had every right to scream. You sat in rooms where your absence would have been louder than your voice. But you stayed anyway. And that's the cruel paradox of being kind in a careless world. You became the helper, the fixer, the emotional anchor. They leaned on you without realizing you were sinking. They called you strong because you never showed them your wounds. They called you the stable one, while they drained your balance. They came to you for light, never once wondering what it cost you to shine. You were the lighthouse during their darkest storms, but no one ever asked who was holding the flame when the wind blew hardest. And every time you questioned whether it was worth it, whether anyone saw what you were giving, your own heart whispered, "This is who we are. Don't let the world make you hard." But even your heart grew tired, tired of waiting for someone to ask if you were okay, tired of being the one who always reached out, tired of pretending you didn't notice the way they only came when they needed. You see, that's the secret no one tells you about kind people. They don't rage, they don't explode, they don't throw fits, they just fade, slowly, silently, tragically. You started replying slower, smiling less, saying, "I'm fine," with a tone that didn't match your eyes. You started feeling invisible, even in the rooms you built, like background music to someone else's spotlight. You were still there, but not really. Not in the way they remembered. Not in the way they took for granted. And they didn't notice, not right away. Because you were always there. You were always available. Always the one who answered, who showed up, who made space, who softened sharp moments with grace. But they didn't notice the shift when you stopped trying so hard. They didn't hear the quiet scream in your silence, because you trained them not to. You trained them to expect the best of you, even when you had nothing left to give. You trained them to believe you'd always be there, no matter how they treated you. And when you finally stopped, when you finally started pulling back, it wasn't dramatic, it wasn't explosive, it was just different. Like a light that used to shine warm, now flickered cold. And here's the thing about people who take others for granted. They don't notice your presence. They notice your absence. They only realize your worth when your silence echoes louder than your kindness ever did. When they reach for you out of habit and find nothing but air, that's when the panic sets in, the regret, the confusion. They ask, what happened? What changed? But you know the truth. Nothing changed. You were always kind, always loyal, always real. They just never truly saw it. They were too busy enjoying the benefits of you to recognize the value of you. They were too busy using your light to consider your flame. And now that you're dimming, now that you're fading, they want to notice. They want to panic. They want to chase. But it's too late, because now you've tasted what it feels like to protect your energy. Now you've seen what it's like to choose yourself. And once kind people do that, once they realize they've been giving to the wrong ones for too long, they don't go back, not out of anger, but out of self-respect. And that's what they never expected, that the one who gave everything would one day give nothing. That the one who never stopped loving would finally stop showing up. Because even the kindest hearts run out of patience. Even the gentlest souls build walls. Even the ones who all— But not anymore. Now they remember you. Now they see you. But all they see is your shadow and the hollow space where love used to live. And you're no longer the one they took for granted. You're the one they'll never find again. They said you were too nice, like it was a flaw, like it was a weakness, like somehow caring too much was a crime in a world that glorifies indifference. They saw your patience and called it passivity. You didn't raise your voice, didn't lash out. You stayed calm even when the storm inside you could have drowned the whole room. They saw that and thought you were weak, thought you were afraid, thought you didn't have it in you to stand up and fight back. But what they never realized, what they still don't understand, is that it takes far more strength to stay calm than it does to explode. You weren't weak. You were disciplined. You weren't passive. You were choosing peace over war every damn day. And that's exhausting, because being good in a world that feeds off chaos is a war in itself. You stayed in places far longer than you should have. Relationships, friendships, jobs, situations, whatever it was, you held on. Even when the cracks turned into canyons, even when your heart screamed at you to let go. You stayed, not because you couldn't leave, but because you hoped they'd change, hope they'd wake up one day and see what they had in you, hope your love would be enough to fix what was broken. And that hope, it was beautiful, but it came with a cost. Every time you stayed, a piece of you chipped away. Every time you forgave what you shouldn't have, your self-worth got a little quieter. Every time you put their needs ahead of your boundaries, you taught them it was okay to treat you like you didn't matter. They didn't see the weight you carried, the emotional labor, the nights you laid in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying conversations you should have ended months ago, the guilt you swallowed when you finally thought about choosing yourself, and then didn't. They didn't see you silencing yourself to avoid hurting them, didn't see you choosing your words like you were walking through a minefield, didn't see you flinch every time someone raised their voice, not because you were scared, but because you didn't want to become like them. You weren't built to harm. You were built to heal. But even healers bleed, and God, how you bled. Not in front of them, of course, never in front of them. You kept that pain tucked behind polite smiles and soft "I'm fines." You let them vent their rage into your chest like you were some emotional landfill. You listened when they ranted, supported them through chaos, became their punching bag, their therapist, their cheerleader. And when it was your turn, silence. Suddenly they were too busy, too tired, too distracted to hold space for you like you did for them. But still, you didn't complain. You bled in silence so they wouldn't even get scratched. You didn't leave when they lied. You stayed when they cheated. You forgave when they blamed you for the things they caused. Because you believed in love, believed in redemption, believed that being good meant sticking it out, even when you were the only one fighting. And that's where they misunderstood you the most. They thought you stayed because you needed them, because you couldn't do better, because you didn't know your worth. But the truth is, you stayed because you loved them more than they loved themselves. You stayed because you saw light in places they'd long given up on. You stayed because your heart had a habit of choosing people it could fix, instead of people who were ready. But being good doesn't mean being a savior. You can't heal people who don't want to stop bleeding, and you can't keep setting yourself on fire just to warm those who would rather stay cold. The hardest part. No one ever warns you about the emotional debt of being the good one. They tell you to be kind, to forgive, to be the bigger person. But they don't tell you what it costs. They don't tell you how being the bigger person often means shrinking yourself, how forgiving people who never apologize eventually turns into self-betrayal, how being good in a cruel world doesn't reward you, it drains you. Because goodness without boundaries becomes self-destruction. Compassion without caution becomes manipulation. And people take advantage of the good ones, not always out of malice, sometimes just because it's easy, convenient. They assume you'll understand, assume you'll always say yes, assume you'll carry what they can't hold, until you're crushed under the weight of everyone else's expectations. And they still look at you like you're the one who let them down. But here's the part that breaks something inside of you. When you finally get tired, when you finally say no, when you finally protect your peace, suddenly you're the villain. Suddenly you're selfish. Suddenly you're cold. Suddenly you've changed. No one remembers how long you held your breath to keep the peace. No one remembers how much you tolerated so others wouldn't feel discomfort. No one remembers the quiet sacrifices, the unspoken loyalty, the times you swallowed your truth to preserve theirs. All they remember is the moment you stopped bending, and that's not love. That's consumption. So you started to change, not overnight. Not in fire and fury, but in small, quiet ways. You stopped replying so quickly, stopped apologizing for things that weren't your fault, stopped rearranging your world for people who wouldn't even slide over a little to make space for you. You started drawing lines, started saying no without a 20-minute explanation, started protecting your time, your energy, your soul. And it felt foreign at first. You felt guilty. Felt like you were being mean, because you've been conditioned to believe that kindness and self-sacrifice were the same thing. But they're not. Kindness is helping someone when you can, not when it kills you. Kindness is empathy, not erasing yourself. And the truth is, you can be kind and still have boundaries. You can be forgiving and still walk away. You can love deeply and still decide you've had enough. Being good doesn't mean being available to be broken. They didn't understand that, not at first. They thought your new you was temporary, a phase, a bluff. They kept testing you, pushing, waiting for you to fold, waiting for the old you to resurface, the one who'd stay, fix, forgive, forget. But that version of you, gone. Not because you became bitter, but because you finally became better. Better at listening to your gut. Better at recognizing red flags. Better at knowing that love without respect is just manipulation with pretty packaging. They thought you'd come back, but you didn't. And now they're confused, lost, desperate to re-enter a space they used to live in, rent-free. But the locks have changed, and you're not opening that door again, not even to explain why, because you don't owe them an explanation. Your growth is not an apology. Your boundaries are not up for debate. You carried everyone, for years, held them during their storms while hiding your own. You stayed strong for everyone except yourself. But not anymore. Now you rest. Now you recharge. Now you finally look in the mirror and recognize the warrior behind those tired eyes. Because being good, truly good, in this cold world, that's not weakness. That's resistance. You didn't change. You just got tired of being everything for people who wouldn't be anything for you. You just realized that kindness without balance is a slow death. And now you're not dying for anyone else's comfort anymore. Now, you live for you. There's always a moment, a line they cross, a breath you hold, a silence that becomes louder than any scream. It was when you realized they weren't listening anymore, that your kindness had become background noise, that your loyalty was assumed, not appreciated, that your presence was taken, not treasured. Maybe it was how they rolled their eyes when you tried to express how you felt. Maybe it was how they sighed like you were a burden just for asking to be heard. Or maybe it was how they laughed when you said, "I don't feel seen." That was the moment. Not because it was the worst thing they ever did, but because it was the last thing you let slide. They didn't even notice, did they? That's the part that stung the most. They didn't notice that your eyes had gone quiet, that your smile had edges now, that your voice, once so warm and inviting, had turned cold, measured, careful. They thought you were just tired, that you'd bounce back, like you always did. But this time, it was different. This time, the damage hit a place inside you that didn't have the strength to rebuild again. You'd given them everything, your patience, your energy, your light. And in return, you got overlooked, disrespected, dismissed. And that's when the switch flipped, not out of hate, but out of clarity. They mistook your silence for surrender. But what they didn't know is that silence can be strategy, that calm is where storms are born, that quiet is where resolve is sharpened like a blade. You weren't quiet because you were fine. You were quiet because you'd screamed enough inside, and no one came running. You were quiet because every conversation had become a performance, because every "I'm sorry" felt like a bandage on a bullet wound, because every plea for understanding was answered with mockery or silence. You stopped explaining, stopped hoping, stopped lowering yourself just to be understood by people who chose not to understand you. And in that stillness, you finally heard yourself, your own voice, tired, cracked, but honest. Your own pain, ignored by them, but now screaming to be acknowledged by you. And that's when you realized you were never weak for being good. You were exhausted from carrying the weight of everyone else's comfort on your shoulders. So you put it down, not loudly, not violently, but with a grace they didn't expect. You didn't slam doors. You didn't send long texts. You didn't beg for closure. You just stopped saving them and started saving yourself. You started saying no more often. Stopped answering messages that only came when they needed something. Stopped showing up to tables where love was one-sided and loyalty was performative. And that's when the power shifted. That's when they started to feel it. Because people don't notice the weight you carry. You became distance. You became absence. You became a boundary they never believed you'd build. And suddenly, you weren't the safe space anymore. You were a closed door, a locked gate, a version of you they didn't recognize, one that had finally chosen peace over people. They crossed the line. And this time, you didn't walk back and pretend it never happened. This time, you stopped extending forgiveness to those who never learned. Stopped giving your light to people who never once asked if it was burning you alive. Stopped bleeding for people who acted like you were supposed to. And that's the most dangerous evolution of all. Because once the kind one stops caring, really stops, there's no coming back. You didn't grow colder. You grew wiser. And sometimes, wisdom sounds like silence. And that silence, it was your survival. Now they sit in the wreckage wondering why you changed, but you didn't. You just finally let the pain teach you what patience never could. You weren't born to be their lesson. But now, that's exactly what you are. There was no speech, no confrontation, no final scream across the room. No threats, no ultimatums, just silence. And then you were gone. No goodbyes, no warnings, no drama. Just one final moment where you looked around, felt the weight of your own exhaustion, and chose peace, chose distance, chose yourself. And while they were still mid-sentence, still explaining, still excusing, still manipulating, you walked out of the room and into your new reality. It wasn't rage that drove you out. It was clarity, the kind that doesn't come overnight, but slowly, like fog lifting from a field. One moment, you're surrounded by confusion, hoping they'll finally see you, feel you, hear you. And the next moment, you're staring at everything with new eyes, their actions, your wounds, your worth, and you realize they were never going to change. So you did. You didn't disappear because you were weak. You disappeared because you'd finally gathered the strength to walk away without explaining why. They had trained themselves to ignore your voice, your feelings, your tears, but your absence, that's what finally made the room go silent. Funny, isn't it? They ignored you when you spoke. But your silence, it screamed in the moments they reached for you out of habit and found nothing but air. Screamed in the late nights when they looked at their phone and your name didn't light it up. Screamed when they told a joke and looked for your laugh. But what they never saw was that every quiet moment, every unspoken hurt, every time you swallowed your pride just to keep the peace, it all added up. You were counting, not with anger, but with precision. Every eye roll, every dismissal, every time they laughed at your vulnerability, you collected it all like evidence in a silent trial. And the verdict? You were done. Not loud, not messy, just final. You weren't the type to burn bridges, but this time you didn't just walk away from the bridge. You erased the path behind you, left them standing on their side, wondering where it all went wrong. They didn't expect you to vanish. They expected another round of apologies, another quiet return, another version of you they could keep on a leash. But this time, there was no return, because you didn't vanish to prove a point. You vanished because you finally saw that staying was costing you parts of your soul you couldn't afford to lose. You were tired of watering a garden that only grew weeds, tired of shining for people who never looked up to see your light, tired of building people up while they silently chipped away at you. So you disappeared. And that disappearance, it changed everything, because your presence was the glue, the balance, the quiet force that held it all together. You weren't just another person in the room. You were the room, the warmth in the chaos, the calm between storms, the one who noticed, who remembered, who loved deeply in a shallow world. And without you, the air shifted. The jokes weren't as funny. The energy felt heavier. The peace, the one they never thanked you for, was suddenly gone. They searched for it, in other people, in distractions, in validation. But nothing filled the void you left, because what you gave them, it wasn't common, it wasn't fake, it wasn't easy, it was real. And real doesn't get replaced. You didn't lose yourself when you walked away. You returned to yourself, to the version of you that existed before you were drained, before you were manipulated, before your love became an unpaid therapy session for people who only wanted your warmth, not your wounds. You remembered who you were before the exhaustion, and the more you stepped into that space, the more distance you created, the more power you reclaimed. You weren't hiding, you were healing. You weren't lost, you were learning how to be present for yourself the way you were always present for them, learning how to say no without guilt, learning how to exist without apology. And that silence you left behind, it became a mirror they had to stare into, a reflection of everything they did wrong, and everything you tolerated far too long. They told themselves they got stuck in loops, scrolling through your page, checking your stories, listening to songs that reminded them of when they didn't appreciate you. They don't say it out loud, but they feel it. They feel it in the quiet, in the ache, in the hollowness that used to be filled by your love. And now there's no voice on the other end to say it's okay, no presence that wraps around them like safety, just silence, and the haunting memory of someone who left without a fight but never returned. Because the kindest ones, they don't always leave loudly. Sometimes they vanish, and that disappearance, that's the sound of strength they never saw coming. They didn't feel it at first, not right away. The silence didn't hit them like a thunderclap. It seeped in, slow, quiet, unassuming, like fog rolling into a city before sunrise. They didn't even know they were breathing differently until they noticed the air felt heavier. The room was colder, not physically, but energetically. Your presence was gone, and with it, the invisible warmth they never once stopped to appreciate. You'd always been the one to check in first, the one who messaged even when they left you on red, the one who stayed on the phone while they vented for hours about everyone, but never once asked how you were doing. And now, their phone is quiet. The messages don't come. No double text. No just checking in. No late-night lifeline when the world gets too loud. They didn't realize how much noise you kept at bay, until you weren't there to hold back the tide. Now every room echoes. They scroll through old messages, the ones they barely read when you sent them. They reread the paragraphs where you poured out your soul, hoping they'd finally understand how much you were hurting. Back then, they skimmed. They rolled their eyes, replied with, "I'm sorry you feel that way," or worse, silence. Now they're searching those same messages for meaning. Every sentence you ever sent has become a code they're desperate to crack, because now they need answers. Now they want to understand what went wrong. Now they want to go back and say the things they should have said when it still mattered. But they can't, because you're not there anymore. And the silence, it's surgical. It cuts deeper every day. They see your name online now and hesitate. They want to reach out, want to ask how you're doing, want to pretend like everything's normal, like they didn't drain you, dismiss you, destroy every piece of peace you tried to offer. But they know they don't have access anymore. They know that door is closed, not slammed, but sealed, quietly, permanently. And that haunts them more than any scream ever could. Your absence has become their shadow. It follows them into conversations that don't quite feel whole, into rooms full of noise where they still feel alone, into the arms of people who look nothing like you, but they chase them anyway, hoping to recreate what you gave so effortlessly. But it never lands, because what you offered wasn't surface. It was depth. It wasn't attention. It was presence. It wasn't just love. It was loyalty wrapped in consistency. And now, they're surrounded by people but starving for connection. They thought you'd come back. They told themselves you'd get over it, that you'd break the silence. that you'd do what you always did. Reach out, explain, apologize for things that weren't your fault. But this time, you didn't bend, you didn't chase, you didn't return. And that's when the fallout began. That's when the guilt kicked in like poison. Slow, creeping, irreversible. They remember every time they left you on scene. Every time they made you feel like a burden for simply needing a sliver of what you constantly gave. They remember the laughs. Not the ones you shared, but the ones they had behind your back. The smirks, the eye rolls, the conversations where they reduced your love to too much. Now that too much feels like something they'd give anything to have again. But it's gone. Kindness, unappreciated, becomes distance. Loyalty, unreturned, becomes silence. They didn't believe those words when you lived them. They dismissed them, mocked them, labeled your love as weakness. Now those same words are etched across their memory like scars they can't scrub off. Because they didn't just lose a person, they lost their safe space. They lost the one who kept showing up, the one who remembered what they liked in their coffee, the one who understood their silences better than others understood their words. They lost the one who saw them fully and still stayed. And what did they give in return? Excuses, inconsistency, lies, distance. They underestimated your departure because it came without noise. They assumed closure needed conflict, that healing needed headlines, that walking away meant shouting from the rooftop what they did wrong. But the real ones, they don't walk away with chaos. They walk away with composure. And that calm, it echoes louder than any fight ever could. It lingers in the spaces they thought you'd always fill. The seat at the table, the late-night phone call, the quiet good morning that never came again. And the realization? It hits hard, because they had a rare soul and treated it like it was common. They had gold and thought it was glitter. They had home and chased hotel rooms instead. Now they wake up next to people who don't know them. They sit across from company that doesn't challenge them. They live in rooms that feel colder than they remember. Because you're not there. And you're not just gone, you're untouchable. That's the fallout. Not flames, not fire, but a haunting, a memory dressed in silence, a presence that lingers in everything they do now. They're not broken because you left. They're broken because they finally realized they pushed away the one thing that was real. And now they sit in their consequences, not yours. And your absence, it isn't empty. It's full of every word you never had to say. It didn't happen overnight. You didn't wake up one morning suddenly powerful, detached, and invincible. It was slow, a quiet evolution. 1,000 small moments when your heart wanted to reach back, but your mind finally said, no more. Every time you silenced the urge to explain, to fix, to care for those who left you bleeding, that was rebirth. Every time you chose silence over a scream, dignity over drama, presence over performance, that was power reawakening. You weren't becoming bitter, you were becoming awake. You see, kind people aren't soft. They're survivors. They walk through fire without screaming, carry heartbreak in their bones, and still manage to build shelter for others with what little peace they have left. But the world doesn't respect kindness until it turns into absence. They only start listening when you go quiet. Only start valuing you when your energy is no longer available to be drained. And now you're not trying to be heard anymore. Now you've become the echo they can't stop hearing. They hear you in their own silence, in the places you used to speak life into, in the routines that once revolved around your check-ins, your reminders, your steady emotional presence. But now you don't show up, and that absence, It screams. It screams louder than your voice ever could, because you were the heartbeat in the background, the peace behind the chaos, the one who made broken things feel whole. They didn't see it when they had it, but now you've changed. Before, you were a shelter, a safe place where their storms didn't feel so violent, a sanctuary where their shadows didn't seem so dark. But now you're a fortress, stone walls built from every disappointment, gates forged in the fire of every betrayal, and your silence. It's the guard dog that never sleeps. You didn't build those walls out of hate. You built them out of necessity, because when you're constantly being invaded, you don't keep decorating the home. You fortify the perimeter. You started walking alone, not because no one cared, but because those who claimed to never left you feeling lonelier than silence ever could. You realized you stopped explaining yourself to people who only listened to respond, stopped showing up to places where your soul felt unwelcome, stopped shrinking so others could feel tall. You outgrew the illusion that love must hurt to be real. And in that space, between heartbreak and healing, something powerful was born. The version of you they swore would never exist without them. The one who doesn't chase. The one who doesn't entertain disrespect. The one who doesn't sit at tables where their worth has to be explained. You became everything they said you couldn't be. And that's what haunts them. Not your success, not your glow-up, but the fact that they know they were part of the reason it happened, and they're no longer invited to witness it. You don't need applause anymore. You don't need validation. You don't even need closure. Because you became the closure. You became the lesson, the consequence. The chapter they reread in their head, wondering how they let the plot twist into you becoming untouchable. You no longer explain your silence because now it speaks for itself. Now it walks into rooms before you do and reminds people who you are, what you've endured, and what you no longer tolerate. Power doesn't always look like control. Sometimes it looks like peace. It's not the loudest person in the room, it's the calmest. It's not in proving you were right. It's in no longer needing to be understood. You learned the art of detachment, not because you stopped loving people, but because you finally started loving yourself more. And with that love came new standards, new boundaries, new energy. You stopped participating in cycles, stopped picking up the phone for chaos disguised as, "I miss you," stopped translating disrespect as, "They're just going through something." You don't entertain confusion anymore, because people who want to be in your life make it clear. And now, you're clear. So clear, in fact, that anyone who approaches you either rises to your frequency or gets repelled by it. You've changed. And not everyone is supposed to come with you. Let them sit with the old version of you in their memory. Let them remember the person who would have dropped everything to show up, even when no one did the same. That version, gone. Because the rebirth didn't just make you stronger, it made you selective. Selective with your time, your space, your love, your forgiveness. You finally understand. Not everyone who wants access to you deserves to enter. You are no longer a home for chaos. You are no longer a playground for inconsistency. You are a storm that learned to settle, a fire that learned to warm only what's worth saving, a soul that no longer burns itself trying to light the way for people who love the dark. This is your power. It was never in how much you gave. It's in how you stopped giving to the wrong ones. It's in how you walk now, with intention, with clarity, with no need to look back. You're not just surviving anymore. You're becoming. And becoming doesn't need permission. Not from them. Not from your past. Not even from the version of yourself that stayed too long. You've already buried that version. Now you walk in truth, in stillness, in command. And they still whisper your name like a secret they're ashamed to say out loud, because deep down, they know. They didn't just lose you, They created the version of you that no longer needs them. And that is the rebirth of power. For the longest time, they got it twisted. They thought kindness was a weakness. They saw your empathy and mistook it for fragility. They saw your forgiveness and called it foolishness. They looked at your soft tone, your calm heart, and thought, easy target. But they never understood. Kindness isn't weakness. It's strategy. It's restraint. It's control. It's power wearing a smile. Kindness is not about being walked on. It's not about saying yes just to keep the peace. It's not about giving to people who take without flinching. And it damn sure isn't about letting disrespect slide because you're better than that. Kindness is clarity. It's the ability to see people for who they are and still choose how you respond. You don't lash out, not because you're scared, but because you're disciplined. You don't retaliate, not because you couldn't, but because you know that your time, your energy, your silence hits harder. You've learned that kindness without boundaries is just self-betrayal, that without standards, kindness becomes a trap, a disguise for enabling. And the truth? You were never meant to be a doormat. You were the floor they stood on because they couldn't stand on their own. You were the cushion for their chaos. You absorbed their storms, their silence, their outbursts, all under the name of being the bigger person. But being the bigger person doesn't mean being the one who shrinks. Now you know better. Now you know that real kindness is selective. You don't give it to just anyone. You don't offer your energy to people who only show up to drain it. You don't open your heart to those who treat it like it's disposable. Your kindness now is earned, not assumed. It's not endless. It's not automatic. It's not free for the undeserving. Because now, you've raised the price of access, and only those with respect, consistency, and truth can afford it. Kindness has been redefined. It's not the gentle yes that comes from fear. It's the quiet no that comes from strength. It's the refusal to be manipulated, guilt-tripped, or emotionally blackmailed. It's the calm in your voice when you say, "I'm not doing this anymore." It's the stillness in your silence when you let people feel the consequences of how they treated you. It's the evolution from savior to sovereign. There is strength in softness, yes, but now you understand there is also strength in space, in letting people feel what it's like to be without the light they took for granted. You don't slam doors anymore. You simply stop opening them. You don't need dramatic exits or long explanations. You just exit, and let your absence teach the lesson your words never could. You used to explain yourself, used to write paragraphs trying to help them understand your heart, used to over-apologize for having boundaries, for needing rest, for finally saying no. Now, you simply walk away from misalignment. You protect your peace like sacred ground. And the irony? They call you cold now, distant, unreachable. They say, "You've changed." But you didn't change out of bitterness. You changed out of healing. And that's what scares them. They don't fear the version of you that begged. They don't fear the version of you that stayed. They don't fear the version that kept giving, kept apologizing, kept bending. They fear this version, the one that knows her worth, the one that values his peace, the one that doesn't respond to chaos like it's a calling, the one that lets people feel their own consequences. This version of you knows that calm retaliation is the most powerful form of justice, not revenge, not cruelty, just rising in silence, just living without them, just healing without announcing it, just glowing in peace while they scroll through the timeline of what they used to have and can never reach again. Your growth is not a middle finger. It's a mirror, a reflection of everything they didn't appreciate when they had it. You now embody quiet power. It doesn't demand attention. It doesn't raise its voice. It doesn't seek approval. It simply exists, and in its presence, everything that isn't real gets exposed. You walk into rooms differently now, not needing validation, not needing anyone to get it, just knowing. You bring value whether they see it or not, because you see it, and that's enough. Let them misunderstand your silence. Let them call you changed, difficult, guarded. You know what you are now, healed, grounded, selective, free. They may not recognize this new version of you, but that's okay. You didn't evolve to be understood. You evolved to be a peace. And that's the new kindness, one that loves with strength, one that gives with wisdom, one that walks away without looking back. They forgot. They forgot what it meant to be loved by someone who showed up without being asked, to be held emotionally by someone who asked, "How are you really?" and waited to hear the answer, to be seen by someone who looked past the surface and still chose to stay. They forgot that kindness, real kindness, is not weakness. It's grace, it's power under control, it's strength wrapped in silence. But they didn't understand that when they had you. They didn't understand what you were giving, not until it was gone. Because you never shouted, you never begged, you never made a scene, you just disappeared. And in that vanishing, you reminded them of what they tried to erase, that the kindest hearts are often the ones most dangerous to lose. You reminded them not with revenge, not with drama, but with absence, the kind of absence that echoes, the kind that lingers in rooms long after you leave them, the kind that turns their comfort into cold air. They forgot the weight of your presence until the silence replaced it. They forgot how much you carried for them, how often you held space, bit your tongue, gave grace, how often you softened your voice, just to be heard, even when your spirit was screaming. They didn't remember the depth of your loyalty, how it kept showing up, even when you were breaking, how it kept forgiving, even when they never asked. They thought it was just who you were, like it was endless, automatic, guaranteed. But then, you reminded them, you were never a guarantee. You were a gift. You were the lesson they ignored. Now you're the consequence they carry. They didn't just lose someone who loved them. They lost the only person who loved them without keeping score. The only one who saw their flaws and stayed. The only one who offered understanding when everyone else walked away. And now they feel it. In the silence after the noise. In the stillness after the storm. In the mirror, when the only reflection staring back at them is regret. You don't have to speak for them to hear you now. Every day without your voice is a sentence in the story they can't rewrite. Every missed moment is a reminder that what they once mocked now feels sacred, that kindness they called soft. It's now the warmth they crave. They're learning now that silence is not emptiness. It's evidence. It's the trace you leave behind when words are no longer necessary. They told people you were too sensitive, but now they're the ones crying into their phones at 2 a.m. They told people you were too emotional, but now they're the ones scrolling through pictures that no longer bring peace. They told themselves you'd come back, but now they've stopped checking. Because they finally believe it. You're gone, and this version of you, it doesn't explain, it doesn't apologize, it doesn't ask to be understood, it simply moves forward, with quiet fire and clear vision. You're not bitter, You're better. You're not cold. You're clear. You don't wish them harm. You just don't wish for their return. Because now you've learned. You don't have to prove you're strong. Your absence already did. They forgot what you were made of. But your silence reminded them. They forgot how deep your love went. But your distance proved it was real. They forgot the way you held everything together. But the fallout showed them exactly who was holding the weight. Let them remember. Let them sit in the silence. Let them tell the story how they want. But you know the truth. They didn't lose you in an argument. They lost you in every moment they chose to ignore your heart. They lost you when they underestimated your breaking point. They lost you the moment they mistook your kindness for weakness. And now, you don't need revenge. You became the reminder, and they'll feel it every time someone shows them surface-level affection, and they realize what real love actually looked like. Every time someone gives up on them quickly, and they remember the one who never did, until they had to. Every time they wonder why nothing feels the same, why everyone leaves too soon, why the energy never matches, they'll remember you, and they'll finally understand. You weren't too much. You were exactly enough for the right ones, and far too rare for the wrong ones. They forgot, but you reminded them, and now they never will.